And tensions could flare today at the United Nations. We're anticipating that. What we can expect to hear from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as he now faces mounting pressure to end the war in Gaza. Tensions will likely be high at the United Nations this morning as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now prepares to address the General Assembly. We have a live look at the Israel-Gaza border this morning. Israel facing some growing backlash from world leaders over its latest offensive into the Gaza Strip, as the UK, Canada, and Australia are among the latest countries to recognize a Palestinian state. Joining us now, founder and executive director of the Lawfare project, Brooke Goldstein. Brooke, thanks so much for joining the program this morning. As you well know, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's criticized the UN in the past, says it's biased against Israel, called the institution morally inconsistent or obsessed with condemning Israel disproportionately. Do you think that's messaging we'll be hearing again in the hours ahead?
Well, thank you for having me this morning. Absolutely. I think that Netanyahu is completely correct. The moral bankruptcy that we see at the United Nations is now leading to these non-binding declarations. That's not diplomacy, it's psychoses. Never before in history has a terrorist group, after committing a massacre, been rewarded with the state. It's as stupid as giving Al-Qaeda a state or ISIS a state. You're giving Hamas, a terrorist group that is currently using civilians as human shields, a reward for terrorism. And I think what we're expecting from Netanyahu is the truth, and he speaks the truth so well. I don't think Israel is going to be taking a defensive position. I think they're going to go on the offense. I think they're going to talk about how idiotic it is to reward Islamist terrorism, because it's not just a problem for the Jewish state, it's a problem for the entire free world. You can see, for example, after Macron declared in France that they were going to recognize a Palestinian state, what happened? You had radical Islamists, take to the street of France and declare that they were going to reestablish the caliphate in Europe and overthrow Macron, because what the Islamists see with these moves at the United Nations and the Western nations supporting and rewarding terror is encouragement. So I think he's going to go on the offense. I think he's going to speak about the truth. I know that, for example, there are speakers being positioned throughout Gaza, that his message is not just for the Western world, it's going to be for the Gazan people. Perhaps he's going to call on them to rise up against Hamas, to assist in finding the hostages. We've seen so much footage being circulated throughout the internet. And I personally, myself, when I was in Gaza speaking to the Gazan civilians, they have no love for Hamas. What's ironic is that the Gazan civilians recognize that Hamas is responsible for everything that ensued after October the 7th. The Gazan civilians recognize that the mistake Israel made, in fact, in 2005 was withdrawing from Gaza and handing it over to Hamas. But for some reason, the Western world has a problem understanding cause and effect and why we are where we are today.
Well, I want to get your take on this as well. This was part of the setup, the condemnation of leaders who, in his view, reward Hamas by supporting a Palestinian state. That's another line of messaging we're anticipating here as well. But I want to get your thoughts on how you see that messaging landing to this group.
I think this group knows exactly what it's doing. I think the United Nations for a very long time has been on a path to undermine and destroy the Jewish state, frankly, which is very sad given the whole concept of international law and the concept of this democracy of all these states, which has basically become a democracy of totalitarian dictatorships, was built to avoid exactly this, avoiding terror, avoiding genocidal maniacs. And the declaration, though it's non-binding, reminding that there's this Palestinian state is not a reality. It's not a legal reality. There are no borders. There are no leaders. There's no currency. There's nothing that could make up the international definition of a state. It is entirely symbolic. And even Hamas, the Hamas leader Ghazi Hamad openly said right after the Western states said that they were going to recognize Palestine, that this was, quote, the fruits of October the 7th. And yet we in the West, for some reason, especially those in the mainstream media, refuse to listen to the words of Hamas themselves, refuse to listen to the words of the Islamist terrorists that support Hamas, saying we are going to continue October the 7th. We're going to continue the genocide, not just against the Jewish people, but we're coming for the West as well. This is a theological war. It's about reestablishing the caliphate. It's about religion for them. It's not about land per se. And the sooner that the Western world wakes up and understands that Israel's security for its civilians is non-negotiable, that it's not going to back down, that it's going to do everything it can to extinguish the threat, and that the reason why we have war in Gaza, the reason why civilians are in harm's way is not because of the IDF, but is because Hamas, a terrorist group, is using civilians as human shields as it actively shoots at the Jewish state. So the results are obvious. Israel must go in and they must take care of Hamas. I also think it would be smart to emphasize the right of the Gazan civilians to refugee status, to be humanitarianly relocated from Gaza, because those who claim to be the protectorates of the Gazan civilians are the ones insisting that they stay and remain to be used as civilian human shields and hostages for Hamas. And that not only prolongs this war, but guarantees more civilian deaths. So that is what the United Nations needs to focus on, the humanitarian relocation of the Gazan civilians, so we can once and for all rid Gaza of Hamas and end this war.
Well, and that is what's making headlines. I mean, understandably, because it is such a horrific situation there. We're going to be listening closely to these comments. Brooke Goldstein, certainly appreciate your breakdown ahead of time. Thank you.